الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على عبد الله ورسوله نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. Well, that's really amazing, and we're so blessed that to have all of the brothers and sisters come together like this, and mashallah in the masjid, and to see the program increasing in numbers, and from how it was last year until how it is this year, there's a really big improvement. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to teach us what benefits us, and to benefit us with what He teaches us, and to increase us in knowledge, to give us the ability to act upon it. So what we've come to talk about today, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, is the theory of evolution. And I'm not going to go too much into science for this. In fact, I would actually like to start by saying that I don't think that this discussion is even a discussion related to science. It's a discussion related to religion. And one of the things I'm going to tell you is that this theory of evolution, which everybody learns in school in biology, has really got nothing to do with biology at all, and has everything to do with religion and atheism and so on. It's not a theory of science, but it's more of a religious belief. But I'm not going to go too much into science because, first of all, I'm not a professor of biology. I studied evolution like you guys did in school. But what we're here to talk about is Islam, not science. So for that reason, I'm not going to go too much into details, but we still have to touch upon some things, because the theory of evolution is put forward as being science. People present it that it's science, right? So we have to start with a really important question, and that is, what is this theory of evolution? First of all, what we need to understand is that even this word evolution is deliberately vague. It's not very clear what it means. And while some people might use the proper name and talk about Darwinism, or Darwin's theory of evolution, or even Darwin's book, The Origin of the Species, or whatever it might be, a lot of people just throw this word evolution. And the reason they do that is because this word is deliberately vague. What does that word even mean, evolution? Just that things gradually change and improve. You can say that this event has evolved from what it was at last year. It's changed a little bit, and it's improved a little bit. So they use these kind of words because it's deliberately vague. And it makes you feel comfortable. Okay, I can see things evolve. Yeah, sure, things evolve. Ideas evolve. Organizations evolve. People mature and evolve. The word linguistically, like the word in the English language, is not that big of a problem. So they use a word that is nice and comfortable for you, to actually hide what the concept behind it really is. And this is one of the criticisms of evolution, or the theory of, or Darwinism, or whatever you want to call it, is that it is deliberately vague, this word evolution. So what do we even mean? Well, here what we're talking about is how all of the different species, the human beings and the animals, how did they come into existence? That's really what this theory, it's not the only thing the theory deals with, but for us today in this sitting, that's what we're concerned with. How did human beings come to be like they are today? And to a lesser extent, how did animals come to be like they are? How did the different species come about? Where did it all come from? How is it that human beings exist today? And this is really interesting because when you look at the world today, you see undoubtable signs everywhere you look that there is a creator. I give you a really simple example. I've just come back from the Maldives. We did a camp there for some young guys between the age of like 12 and 19. And while we were doing the camp, we walked through the jungle. And you're walking through the jungle, there's obviously marshland, there's little trees growing out of the water, there's coconut trees, there's mosquitoes, there's all kinds of things around. And as I'm walking through there, I come across a plastic wrapper. I just came across it, like I don't know what it was for, like some sweets or something, somebody dropped a plastic wrapper. But you look at it and you instantly know that this doesn't belong here, right? You instantly know someone made this. This didn't grow out of the ground. I didn't turn around to the guide and say, wow, you guys actually have plants that grow plastic here in the Maldives. I knew for a fact that this is something that came from someone came there and dropped it, and it came from something that was made by people. When you look at the world and the universe, everything you see tells you that there is a creator. And generally I'm not even going to talk about proof in terms of Islam. Just generally looking at it, this is logical and probable, which means that it makes sense and it's easy to understand how that might have happened. Let me give you another example. Darwin loves the idea of monkeys, right? You know, Darwin's into monkeys. So let's take a monkey. Since we're talking about Darwinism, we're going to borrow one of Darwin's monkeys, but we're not going to make a man out of it. This monkey, we're going to give him a bag. And the bag's going to be full of Scrabble tiles. You've seen Scrabble, right? The tiles with A, B, C, whatever is written on them. You have to make words. And we're going to tell the monkey to just play with the tiles, throw the tiles around, and see how long before the monkey can produce an encyclopedia. How long will it take the monkey to produce an encyclopedia? No, don't worry. We'll give him. Let's say we'll give him 100 billion years to throw those tiles around and see how long it is before he can even make the first page of, let's say, I don't know, some famous play by Shakespeare or something. Let's just give him a simple task. All of you know that is as near to impossible as impossible can get. Someone might turn around and say, it's not impossible if there was an infinite number of universes and an infinite number of monkeys and an infinite number of tiles. But it's as close to impossible, it's really hard to understand. Like it hurts your head to start thinking about, and that's why when the atheists respond to this argument, they say, well, actually the universe is so old, there are infinite number of monkeys with an infinite number of bags, and you start scratching your head and thinking, man, this is hurting my head. But when I tell you there's a creator who is all powerful, who created the heavens and the earth and everything that's in it, you're like, yeah, okay, I understand that. I'm not talking about proof. I'm just talking about the fact that it's actually easy to understand, easy to accept, doesn't require a degree in maths or some kind of really weird understanding of the universe. It's very easy to understand. Creator, separate from his creation, created everything. That's why there is intelligence, that's why there is design, that's why there are emotions, and that's why there is our souls, and that's why we have a consciousness and all of that stuff. Very easy to understand. It's not difficult. It doesn't require anything complicated. And even a small child can understand, yeah, okay, we were created. God created us. Simple. But that doesn't help the atheist. The atheist struggles. Because the atheist doesn't want to believe that there's a God. So the atheist needs, very ironically, the atheist needs a savior. The atheist needs a Jesus Christ-like figure, like Jesus is for the Christians, alayhi salam, or like the Christians believe Jesus to be, the Savior that is going to come and save me from all my sins. The atheist actually needs a Savior. He needs someone to come along and save him from the fact that his belief doesn't make any sense to anybody. And his Savior is Darwinism. That's the thing that he uses, and he brings it out and he says, there you go, this is how the universe came about without a creator. And that's really what we're here to talk about. We're not here to talk about biology. I don't teach biology, and like I said, I'm not a professor of biology. We're here to talk about religion, and specifically why it is that atheists and some Muslims also now have been influenced by them, but particularly the atheists, this group of what you would call militant atheists, aggressive atheists. They're not like sort of let everyone believe, those who are writing books like the one who wrote that book, God is Not Great, and then he wrote another book, something else with another silly title, and so on. People like that, the God delusion, they need to have a savior. Someone needs to come and save them from the fact that their belief doesn't make sense, it's not logical, and you struggle to accept it. And so what they did is they found something that can save them. And that is the concept of Darwinism, or what we commonly call the theory of evolution. Now, just in case you think I'm actually making this up and that it's not really their savior, they even say that it's their savior. So Thomas Huxley reviewed Charles Darwin's book, and he did that in 1860. And he called it a gun in the armory of liberalism. In other words, this is our weapon. This is what we're going to destroy the concept of God with. This is how we are going to shoot down, this is the gun we're going to use to shoot down the concept of God. Not only him, he wasn't the only one. In fact, several of them actually quoted, he said in another quote, he said, the liberation we wanted was liberation from a political and economic system and liberation from a certain system of morality. In other words, we wanted to be free to do whatever we wanted to do. And we didn't want to have any restrictions from God telling us you can do this and you can't do this. So we needed something to get rid of the need to be moral, to have right and wrong. And what we use to get rid of right and wrong is the theory of evolution, or Darwinism. And again, there are other quotes also in which people talk about the fact that this thing was basically, it was there basically to provide the atheist with a weapon, or provide the atheist with a tool to get rid of the idea that God exists. So how would they do that? They needed to explain how the earth came about and how we came to be human beings like we are. And the way they explained it, without getting into a lot of complicated detail, is there was a common ancestor, everything came from one thing, and very small changes happened over a very, very long time, and that nature selected, or even that's probably the wrong term, but let's stick with that for now, that nature selected the best changes to survive, and through that process things became like they are today. So let's start again. Common ancestor, that means that we all started from the same thing, and that thing, as it reproduced, as it made more things, it made some small changes. Some of those changes were better than others, more suited to the environment than others. They had an advantage over others. Like someone being really strong has an advantage over someone who is not really strong. And so the ones that had the advantage survived, And then the two, it just kept going and going and going like that over billions and billions or whatever long period of time. And finally, we came up with intelligent human beings. Obviously via the ancestor that they claim, which is a variety of the ape. The ape or the ape family. When you explain it like that, it seems unbelievable. And actually it is fairly unbelievable, but it seems unbelievable. You think like, okay, that's why often they focus, to be honest with you, on a monkey, or let's say a chimpanzee or an ape, let's say an ape evolving into a human. Because you can kind of see it, right? I can imagine how an ape, it's kind of, it's relatively close to what a human, it's got arms and legs, and it can probably walk on two legs kind of thing, and it's got like sort of facial feet. I can kind of get how maybe an ape would have evolved into a human. If they try and tell you the story from the beginning, they lose a lot of people, because you started off as just bacteria. How those little single cell things evolved into this extremely complex human being that has emotions and feelings and all the rest, really they can't explain. So they try to focus you on a bit that they think you can understand. And I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, will have seen the pictures. I'm sure they learn after a while that pictures always help. You get a picture of an ape that walks on four legs and is very hairy and doesn't look very human at all, and then the ape gets a little bit straighter and a little bit straighter and a little bit straighter, and then the ape walks on two legs, and then the ape gets a little bit taller and a little bit less hairy, and then finally it turns into a white European guy. That's evolution for you, right? So that picture has no basis in science at all. It has not a single bit of evidence, not a single fossil record, not a single test, not a single observation, nothing, zero. It is just an imaginary cartoon that was drawn to make people believe. And even if you actually ask a scientist on this, usually most people will actually admit that it is complete fiction. It's drawn there to make it easy for you to sell you the idea. Can you imagine if they started at the beginning with this tiny single-celled organism that is just goop in the sea, and how that would have evolved into a human being? That would have taken several million pages to draw. But the idea of just drawing an ape like that, it looks good and it's easy to sell people on it. But it actually doesn't have any science behind it at all. Not even in the books of science, it doesn't have any science behind it at all. It's an artist's impression. It's like when you see a picture of the spaceship that's going to travel to Mars. It's an artist's impression of what it would look like if it really existed. In other words, someone took what Darwin said and drew a picture of what it would look like if it was true. They didn't base it on science at all. They never took science and actually looked at science said and science said and science said. All they did is just said, if it was true, this is what it would look like. And they drew it like that. So now we've got the idea behind it. We need to understand the reality of it. The reality of it is that the theory of evolution, as it was proposed by Charles Darwin, is a religious belief and not a scientific belief. It's a religious belief. And the reason it's a religious belief, we can take it from 2 points of view. First of all, let's ask ourselves what science is. So how do we know what's science and what's religion? Since today I'm doing both, right? I'm doing a bit of science, bit of religion. How do you know what science is? Well, to take a common definition, science is knowledge based on empirical observations and capable of being tested for its validity by other researchers working under the same conditions. Anyways, what that means is basically you think of something, then you test it, you observe it, and other people can repeat it. That's what science is. So let's put Darwinian theory against this concept. Darwin came up with an idea. He was looking at birds and he saw that the birds changed a bit, and he came up with an idea. Fair enough. Has evolution ever been observed? And I'm not talking about microevolution here. Like, I'm not talking about the fish got a little bit bigger, or the fish's tail got a little bit longer, or the bird grew a few more feathers. I'm talking about a bird turning into a monkey. I'm talking about a fish turning into a crocodile. I'm talking about, some things, a change of kind, a change of species, macroevolution. Has it been observed? The answer is no, it hasn't been observed. Is it observable? Is it testable? Can you even develop an experiment to test whether this could be possible? Well, since Darwin said it took, several billion years, it's not testable or observable by human beings. Is it repeatable? In other words, have we been able to repeat macroevolution? I tell you what it is, we couldn't do it for humans because we're not going to just, make a human like that. But could we at least, let's start small. Could we at least turn bacteria into something? Bacteria grow really fast, right? So you put them in, if we put bacteria in some tubes and we did some things with it, could we at least turn bacteria into something a bit bigger, something a bit more complicated? They've been trying to do that for a long time, and the answer is no. They actually couldn't even get past step one. They were unable to make that bacteria turn into anything other than the same bacteria that it was in the beginning. Even though bacteria you should be able to do it, because it goes through in a very short space of time what human beings go through in millions and hundreds of millions of years. Bacteria can go through in a very short space of time. So you should be able to do it with something. So it's not observable, it's not testable, it's not repeatable. There's no one able to check the truth of it, no other researchers. It's not empirical, it's not based on, observation. Really, it's not knowledge at all. So what does Darwinism come under if it doesn't come under science? Well, actually, the philosopher Karl Popper, he said, it is not a testable scientific theory, but a metaphysical research program. In other words, it's a matter of religion, not a matter of science. And the second way that we can prove that Darwinism is a matter of religion and not a matter of science is when you point out the flaws in Darwin's theory to scientists who believe in it. What are their answers? Their typical answer is, in the future, we believe that we will find the answer. And in fact, in this, I actually want to quote you from Darwin himself. From Darwin himself. Because Darwin himself said that it's a matter of belief. He himself described it as a matter of belief. Let me find this quote. In fact, he mentions it more than once, but I'll just quote you from The Origin of the Species. He says, "I can see no very great difficulty in believing that natural selection has converted the simple apparatus of an optic nerve into an optical instrument as perfect as is possessed by any member of the great articulate class." In other words, I believe that the human eye evolved. I believe. In fact, later on he also says, can we believe that natural selection can produce or could produce? Can we believe? So the scientists who follow Darwin, to be honest with you, they all speak in the same way. We believe, I believe, we have a belief. We are confident that in the future we will have the answer. The answer will come. We believe the answer is going to come. We believe that we are going to find the missing link, which we have not yet found, but we believe, and we are very confident that we believe that the answer is going to come. That's not science. That's religion. That's Iman. It's not Iman in Allah, but it's still Iman. It's still Iman. Like Allah Azza wa Jalla said, يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْجِبْتِ وَالطَّاغُوتِ. They believe in magic and they believe in the false gods that are worshipped besides Allah. They have Iman in them. So these atheists, they have Iman. They have real Iman, not Islamic Iman, but they have Iman that this will deliver a result for them in the future. But they're honest enough usually to say that they don't really have the answers at the moment. And that's so different to what you're taught when you actually read about evolution the first time and you look into it the first time. Wallah, you would think that it was ilm yaqeen, certainty. You would think that the whole world agreed upon it, that nobody ever disagreed, that their evidence is crystal clear, that anyone who rejects it is just backwards, like, uneducated, that it's well accepted. You would think that they were certain about it. But in reality, they're not certain at all. They just have a belief that one day Darwinism is going to prove once and for all that God doesn't exist. They don't have that, they just believe that one day it will come. And there's actually a really good video on that, where someone goes around a bunch of PhD candidates and master's candidates and asks them about macroevolution. In other words, an animal or a species turning into a totally different animal or a totally different species. And basically every answer is, I believe. We believe that in the future that answer will come. But that answer is not there right now. So what we've understood really is that Darwinism isn't really science at all. It's certainly not normal in the normal category of science. It's not observable, it's not testable, it's not repeatable. And it is only held up by the belief of the people who consider it to be true. The belief of the people. That's the only thing that holds it up. What's the alternative? The alternative is often called divine design. The fact that God designed and created this universe to be like it is. And as I said, when you actually put this forward, people will ridicule you that, oh, you're so uneducated. You're like those people who believe that the world is flat, or that the sun orbits the earth, or whatever. But the reality is, even science actually has this problem. That if you look at, in fact, just look at any area in science, you'll see things that people believed for certain, and then tomorrow they didn't believe it for certain anymore. For example, the first scientist who said that the world was round and not flat was ridiculed by scientists. We've proven that the earth is flat, they said. We're certain of it. We have immeasurable proof that the earth is flat. And then when he went round and came back on the other side, they said, it's actually round. And now we have proof that it's round, and there's immeasurable proof, and we're absolutely... So the point is that science itself changes. And Allah Azza wa Jal indicates this to us in the Quran. And I believe this is one of the strongest arguments you can put forward, Quranic arguments you can put forward towards these people. Allah Azza wa Jal said, أَمْ خُلِقُوا مِنْ غَيْرِ شَيْءٍ أَمْ هُمُ الْخَالِقُونَ أَمْ خَلَقُوا السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ بَلْ لَا يُوقِنُونَ. Were they created from nothing? Or did they create themselves? Or did they create the heavens and the earth? Rather, they're not sure. And I think the fact that Allah chose that last part, بَلْ لَا يُقِنُونَ, they're not sure, this is very powerful. Because it shows it's not that they don't have ideas about it. They have ideas about where the earth came from and where you came from and whether it came from... They have ideas. But they don't have certainty. They don't have yaqeen. All they have is guesswork, nothing else. The other thing that it's interesting before we get into the problems with the theory of evolution, the other thing that's interesting to think about is that evolution actually doesn't answer the question that the atheists have been trying to get it to answer. They've been trying to get it to answer how human beings came about. And they put forward an idea of how human beings came about, and even how monkeys came about, and even how birds and, cats and all sorts of things. They came up with some ideas about how they came about. Does the theory of evolution, or does Darwinism answer where the universe came from? No. So, in other words, what they did is they actually took the focus away from the big problem they have. Is that even if you explain that human beings came out of this and that and the other and turned, into apes, and the apes turned into human beings, you still haven't explained where the apes came from. And even if you say that the apes, they came from, reptiles that crawled out of the ocean, and they came from fish, and they came from bacteria and whatever, you still haven't answered where the bacteria came from. And even if you said it came out of this, cosmic goop that came down with from a comet that struck, or something or whatever that turned into this, you still haven't answered where the comet came from. In all honesty, they're just trying to hide the fact that the real heart of it, they haven't answered. Not that they've answered the bit about human beings either, but this is also important. Because what they've just tried to do is just use smoke and mirrors to just take you away from the fact they haven't answered where the universe came from in the beginning. And in fact, all of their laws of science and physics, and I actually really benefit, I was teaching my son physics for his GCSE, and we were talking about the universe. And I actually just went on this, purely secular YouTube video, non-religious, about where the universe came from. And they explained everything all the way up to the Big Bang. So backwards all the way to the Big Bang. Theories and everything, all the way, evolution, whole lot. But when it got to the Big Bang, the video said something really profound. They said, here, when we get to this point, we have no idea where this came from. Because the laws of physics no longer exist at that point. In fact, time no longer exists at that point. Since time is related to the universe, the physical matter of the universe we're in, time is only understood in the context of this physical universe. And so when the physical universe didn't exist, time didn't really exist either. And then they said, well, maybe it came from a big, whatever the opposite of a Big Bang is, like it went the other way, or maybe there are millions of universes that are all having Big Bangs at the same time, or maybe it was something else. But they couldn't explain. They went all the way back with all of their theories to one point, and then at that point they said, to be honest, all of our laws, all of our rules, all of our principles, none of them work at that point. Because the laws of the universe don't exist. We can go back to a point where there is no time, nothing works, there's no gravity, there's no energy, the whole thing, there's nothing. So that being said, it all has to come back to the fact that there comes a point where they don't have an answer. We would argue that they don't really have an answer for any of it, all the way throughout, but there comes a point where they don't have an answer. So I wanted you to know that so that you never ever think that these guys actually have a theory that explains where life came from. They have a theory of how monkeys or apes turned into people, but they don't have an explanation of where the universe came from. They don't have any idea at all. And as Allah Azza wa Jal said, بَلْ لَا يُوقِنُونَ, they are not sure. They don't have yaqeen. We as Muslims, we have yaqeen about where the universe came from. We have certainty about where human beings came from. We're 100% sure. And this is why, out of all of this, the point that I wanted you to take home more than anything before we get into the individual answers is the strongest evidence against Darwinism or any other atheist ideology is the Quran. The Quran can be proven to be a miracle. The Quran can be proven to be the speech of Allah. And if the Quran is proven to be the speech of Allah, and if the speech of Allah says that it didn't happen, that's your yaqeen. You don't need anything else. And that's why sometimes when we try and debate with an atheist, we actually make a mistake. We actually go down to their level. And we try to argue with them on their level. So we talk about bacteria, and we talk about observation, and we talk about changes of kind, and microevolution, and macroevolution, and evolutionary theory, and all that stuff. But we neglect the biggest proof, which is that the Quran tells us it didn't happen. And that, for us, is enough of a proof. We don't need anything after that. We don't need to know anything about biology or anything about evolution. We only need to know that the Quran tells us that it didn't happen, and we can prove that the Quran is the book of Allah. And therefore we have yaqeen, and they have shak, doubt, adhan, guessing, theories, nazariyat, ideas. But we are the ones who have yaqeen. We are the ones who have certainty. So let's just take a moment out to go to the Quran and to ask ourselves what the Quran says about the creation of Adam. Allah Azza wa Jal said, إِنَّ مَثَلَ عِيسَى عِنْدَ اللَّهِ كَمَثَلِ آدَمَ خَلَقَهُ مِنْ تُرَابٍ ثُمَّ قَالَ لَهُ كُنْ فَيَكُونَ. The example of Isa in the sight of Allah is like the example of Adam. He created him from turab. Turab is like a dust. ثُمَّ قَالَ لَهُ كُنْ فَيَكُونَ. Then he said to him, be, and it is, and he was. And Allah Azza wa Jal mentioned, وَلَقَدْ خَلَقَنَا الْإِنسَانَ مِنْ سُلَالَةٍ مِنْ طِينٍ. We created man from clay. And Allah Azza wa Jal said, إِنَّا خَلَقْنَاهُمْ مِنْ طِينٍ لَازِبٍ. We created him from a kind of clay. Allah Azza wa Jal mentioned, خَلَقَ الْإِنسَانَ مِنْ صَلْصَالٍ كَالْفَخَّارِ. He created man from a kind of clay, like the pottery, the clay of pottery that makes a noise. And Allah Azza wa Jal told us that He created every living thing from water. مِنَ الْمَاءِ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ حَيٍّ. Every living thing was created from water. How do we reconcile between these things? It's really very easy. Clay is a mixture of dust or dirt and water. So we have water, and every living thing came from water. And that's why what I want you to understand now is what does it really mean for something to be a shubha? The word shubha in Arabic, like a confusing idea or like a wrong belief, like a confusing belief, is called a shubha because it has shabahun bil haqq. It resembles the truth. It's kind of similar to the truth. There are elements of Darwinism that are similar to the truth. So when you look at human beings and animals and the different animals between themselves, do you see a resemblance? You do see a resemblance between some animals and others. And you do see many things in common, particularly as Islam tells us, the fact that we were all created from water. The fact that life came from water. And even in terms of Darwinian theory, that is also accepted, that the origins of life were in water. So that in itself resembles the truth. The fact that Allah Azza wa Jal creates things which are similar but different. وَأُتُوبِهِ مُتَشَابِهَاتٍ or mutashabiha. Here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains that He creates things that are similar but different. So there's no doubt that an ape is more similar, or has a greater similarity to a human than a fish. And the fact that they say, oh yeah, but don't you know that the DNA that we share with this animal there's 97% the same DNA. We don't have a problem with that. Because that's not what we're actually debating or talking about. The fact that Allah Azza wa Jal created everything from a common origin means that we will share a lot of the same DNA. The fact that Allah Azza wa Jal created things that are similar to each other but different, that also means that there are going to be similarities between certain types of animals and things like that. But that doesn't prove that they all evolved from each other. And Allah Azza wa Jal said, يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسُ اتَّقُوا رَبَّكُمُ الَّذِي خَلَقَكُم مِّن نَّفْسٍ وَاحِدَةٍ وَخَلَقَ مِنْهَا زَوْجَهَا وَبَثَّ مِنْهُمَا رِجَالًا كَثِيرًا وَنِسَاءً. O mankind, have taqwa of your Lord who created you from a single soul and created from it its mate, and from them both many men and women came forth. This idea of having a single human being that was the father of all of mankind, that doesn't work with Darwinism. Actually, Darwinism also has a problem with this. It doesn't really explain that while all these, the chance of a human being evolving like that is so tiny and so impossible, but it must have happened, according to Darwinism, many times, and then that one survived. And this idea of there being like a common father of mankind is also problematic for Darwinism as well. So what are some of the other issues that Darwinism has? What are some of the other problems that, and again, I'm not going to go into biology, I just want to point out some really obvious problems with it. One of the problems it has is that they use changes within the species as an evidence for changes between species. So for example, we see, let's say, human beings getting shorter. When we hear about Adam and how tall Adam was, and it's mentioned in the hadith how tall he was, alayhi salam, and we see that human beings are getting shorter. That is something human beings are, for want of a better word, evolving. But does that indicate that they're going to eventually turn into mice? No, it doesn't. And that's why that's one of the problems, is that all of the observations that Darwin made were observations of the same animal changing. Like the bird's beak getting longer or shorter, or the fish getting slightly longer or shorter, or its tail getting slightly bigger, whatever. They observed a fish being a fish and a bird being a bird. They didn't observe a fish turning into a bird or a bird turning into a fish. And so you can't use, this is what we call in Islam, qiyasun ma'al fariq. You're comparing two things that are different from each other. So you can't use microevolution, as in small changes that happen within the same species, as in human beings getting shorter, or whatever it might be. You can't use that as an evidence for some animal turning into another animal. We mentioned one of the problems with evolution is it has never been observed, not even in bacteria. And we still haven't observed even the beginning of it. Because, okay, we might not be able to observe what happens over 1 billion years. I understand that. But can we not observe at least the fundamentals of evolution happening? The fundamentals of evolution, like multiple, what we're really looking for are multiple steps, not one change, but a change that builds on top of a change that builds on top of a change. Multiple changes sort of building on top of each other that could potentially, in 1 billion years or 10 billion years or 100 billion years, turn into something completely different. But not even that. We can't even observe those basic changes. One thing, and I believe this is another strong argument, logical argument, and one of the biggest problems with evolution, is that if evolution was true, and this is how I usually explain to an atheist. When they come to me and they talk to me about evolution, I say to them, if evolution was true, it would be the biggest proof for the existence of God. And they're like, I don't get it. Why? So what I'm going to show you now is that if evolution was true, it would be an evidence for God, not an evidence against God. And that is that for evolution to work, it has to be intelligent. And the reason it has to be intelligent, and Darwin very clearly said it's not intelligent. Darwin very clearly said that nature isn't intelligent. It's not intelligent. So in other words, it can't plan or design something which is going to happen in 100 million years' time. It can only plan something which is immediately beneficial. That's what Darwin said. But the problem is that these changes that happened, that actually supposedly led to human beings, were not beneficial at the time at all. They were only beneficial hundreds and hundreds of millions of years later. So let's talk about a fish. And this fish is going to evolve into a crocodile. So Darwin says every step along the way, nature selected the best, the most beneficial. So this fish obviously didn't grow scales and like hands and legs right away. It probably grew like a tiny little lump on the side. How did nature know that that tiny little lump on the side was going to grow into a beneficial limb later on, when that beneficial limb took 50 million years to evolve? How did nature know that that lump on the side of that fish was going to be beneficial? Darwin himself actually answers this, but he answers it with such a stupid statement that it's almost unbelievable that he would even try to answer it like that. He says, but we do see some intermediate forms that are beneficial. So he talks about, like, you know those rats that fly, they look like they look a bit like bats, but they have wings and they fly. And he says, look, if those are beneficial, so there must have been a benefit in all of that. But even those little rat things that fly, let's ask ourselves, here we've got a rat, and the rat is going to turn into a flying rat. On the first day, it doesn't just sprout wings and fly off, which would be beneficial, because as it's being chased by an owl, it would be able to just take off and fly through the trees and escape the owl. But in the beginning, it just grew like a lump. And the lump became just a little bit bigger, and a little bit bigger, and a little bit bigger. And 50 million years later, it turned into wings, and then it flew off. How did nature know that that lump was going to be beneficial 50 million years later? Now we have the idea that nature is intelligently planning things billions of years in advance. And that is a proof for the existence of God, not a proof against the existence of God. So actually, if you look at this theory, if it was true, which it isn't, it would be an excellent proof for the existence of God. Because all these things that evolve in a way that is beneficial millions of years later. It's not beneficial at the time. Because the whole point of Darwin's theory is these changes are extremely small. If Darwin proposed that suddenly, one day, this rat woke up with wings, it would be understandable. He wouldn't have a proof for it though. But if he could say that the rat just woke up one day and it had wings and it flew off like a caterpillar wakes up and it's a butterfly, it would make sense. But the fact is, it doesn't. It didn't work like that. It took millions and millions of years. So how did nature choose the best thing at that point? What nature did is choose the best thing that was going to be best 100 million years later. And that is a proof for the existence of God and not a proof against the existence of God. Even though we don't believe the entire theory whatsoever. But if we were to argue with them, like we talk about, we say, from the point of view of just for the sake of the argument, even if I accept your theory for the sake of argument, your theory proves that God exists. There are some more problems with the theory of evolution. One problem that you have with the theory of revolution is that these changes are very rare, very random, and extremely unbeneficial. So we talked about the monkey throwing the tiles. Actually, that's a bad example. Why it's a bad example is because when the monkey throws the tiles behind his back, every tile is actually beneficial. Every tile has a potential to make a real word. It's actually beneficial. What would be a better example is if we gave a monkey an ocean's worth of tiles, all of which were blank except one, and then asked him to throw them behind his back and see how long it takes him to make an encyclopedia. Because these changes that happen, that Darwin talked about, that caused human beings, these changes are extremely rare. They rarely happen. They're totally random as far as we can see. And they almost never make anything beneficial for all the time we've been observing. And of course they reply and say, yeah, well, but if you observe things in billions of years, you might... The point is that even if we look at our time, if we look at 100 years or 200 years, we still don't see beneficial changes happening, except extremely rarely. Nowhere near enough to actually change one animal into a completely different animal. The other problem we have, and the people who support Darwinism, they love fossils. But the problem with fossils are, apart from the fake fossils, like you have fake fossils like Pitt. What was that one called? Pitt something man and all that. That was Piltdown man. That was a false fossil. But actually, if we look at the fossil record, we see another problem, and that is that we see that most of the animals that we know came about in a very short period of time. Fossils show us that these animals came about within quite a short period of time. That doesn't help the theory of evolution, because the theory of evolution is the only reason we haven't seen this is because it took a really, really long time. And if you waited a really, really long time, you would see human beings evolving into something, and you would see evolving into something. But yet again, when we look at fossils, we see that actually there's something to talk about, something called the Cambrian explosion, which is lots of varied, complex life forms happening in a very short space of time. Not, as Darwin would suggest, a long time for these things to evolve. If you look at fossils, there are fossils that took a long time, but there are a lot of complex life that happened at a very short period of time. Darwin himself said, if numerous species belong to the same genera or families have recently started all into life all at once, the fact would be fatal to the theory of descent with slow modification through natural selection. In other words, if you find that all the animals came about at the same time, my theory is complete rubbish. And that is exactly what the fossil record shows. How do they answer this then? They talk about things like evolutionary surges. There was a surge of evolution at this time. That's actually just a word that doesn't mean anything at all. A surge of evolution. So Darwin's idea that this happens very slowly over a very long period of time, except that there was just this one particular time where it happened really, really fast. Like extremely fast. Why? What was nature doing differently that day? Because we do, we're not supposed to be talking about God. God wasn't involved. There's no planning. What was nature doing to make it happen really, really fast? And where's the proof? Again, we believe one time in the future, at some point, that we're actually going to get this. We're actually going to get this. A lot of forgeries, Piltdown Man, Nebraska Man, and so on, trying to prove false ideas. And there are tons of other issues with this particular theory, and as we go through it further and further, we just start to see more and more issues with this theory, and more problems as we go on. And that's why Einstein himself, and it wouldn't be complete for our science lesson without quoting Einstein. Einstein, he said, "Then there are the fanatical atheists, whose intolerance is of the same kind as the intolerance of the religious fanatics and comes from the same source." And actually what Einstein said is pretty much very accurate, to be honest. That these atheists are actually no different to the people who are fanatically arguing for the existence of God through religion, and actually both of them have the same source, that it's this issue of a fundamental religious belief that sort of forces that atheist to carry on. Whereas it's the same kind of fundamental religious belief that pushes a person of religion to keep on arguing. It's the same religious belief that pushes an atheist to keep on arguing. It's not because it's actually true. And as we said, the more and more you look at it, the more and more you see that this argument doesn't stand up. It's not scientific. It doesn't have evidence for it. And it's based on beliefs and hopes that in the future we'll get an answer. And actually, it's based on almost a kind of bullying, where you see within the scientific community, anyone who doesn't believe in it is ridiculed, is attacked, they're not allowed to have papers published, they're called crazy, they're called creationists, and all these names. Science is, it's that fanaticism that Einstein talked about. They're not being rational, they're not being logical, they're just the same kind of fanaticism as you get from people of religion. So that's worth bearing in mind. Another one that I'll mention as a flaw, just to finish off. Two flaws, but they're both kind of part of the same thing. Basically, they come under the question, why is this not happening now? So if this evolution takes a long, long time, and it's really random, and it's happens over billions of years, but since it's been happening for a really long time, shouldn't we then have lots of evolution happening now? Like observable evolution. Because even though we couldn't see our own evolution, but evolution is something very slow happening over a long period of time, we should also be able to see all of these other things evolving in different types. We should be able to see lots of what they call intermediate forms, like failed attempts at evolution that have just stopped. It got as far as being a rat with wings, and then it didn't evolve further or whatever. But actually we don't see any of these intermediate forms. We don't see any apes that have like that, sort of half human features or whatever. We don't see any of that. And we don't see anything else evolving that maybe was a bit behind us. Maybe let's say it was like 20 million years behind us or 30 million years behind us. But we still don't see any evidence of that either. So we don't see, even though it should be happening all around us, we can't actually see it happening all around us. Which again gets explained as, there was a surge of evolution that made human beings, and that surge has never happened again. Isn't that then an evidence for the existence of God? That if we argue that, okay, your theory is correct, isn't that then an evidence that that surge that has only ever happened once in the history of this planet was actually decreed by God to happen. Actually, as Muslims, we would say, nah, not really, because we disagree with the entire theory, we disagree with it from beginning to end. But just for the point of argument, even if you were to argue that there was this big surge and it's only ever happened once and that was what resulted in human beings, again, we would have to argue that that is in itself an evidence that God exists. I tried to take away the more complicated stuff. I try to take out as many of the quotes as possible and just keep it as simple as possible. But basically what we want you to come away with is that, as we said, it's more of a belief than it is a scientific theory. That our strongest evidence is not nature or fossils or whatever. Our strongest evidence is the Quran. The Quran said it didn't happen, and the Quran is certainly true. Haqqun yaqeen, as Allah Azza wa Jalla described the Quran. Inna hadha lahuwa haqqul yaqeen. This is a certain haqqun yaqeen. It's a certain truth. So if we know the Quran is a certain truth and the Quran says that it didn't happen, then we don't need to have any other further discussion. But also, even if we look at it carefully, we start to see a lot of the flaws and the faults in it. And we can even go far enough that we can turn around to them and say, if your theory was true, which we don't believe, but even if it was true, in of itself it would prove that God exists and not that God doesn't exist. It's really, really sad that a lot of our young people leave Islam because of this. Not only this, in fact, I'll be honest, I might make a statement and say that I don't believe that people really leave Islam because of evolution. I actually believe that evolution is used as an excuse for people to leave Islam because of something else. So if people don't leave Islam because of evolution, why do they leave Islam? I believe they leave Islam because of their desires and their emotions. They want to do haram. They don't want to be told what's allowed and what's not allowed. And that, when you look at it, to be honest with you, is exactly what Huxley said himself. When he said that when we took Darwin's theory of evolution, it wasn't that we believed in it, to be honest. We just wanted liberalization and to be liberated from a certain moral code. We wanted to basically not have any haram anymore. That's what he said. We wanted something that would allow us not to have any haram anymore. And that's why when we talk about evolution, we should also talk about evolution of the Christian church. How that evolved and changed until it's become the same thing. Because they realized we can't sell this religion to anyone if it has haram in it. So they literally just crossed out everything haram. Never mind, that's not haram, that's not haram. The only things left haram in Christianity today are the things that are universally haram, like murder and theft and things like that. There's nothing really left that's actually haram anymore. Because they realized the reason everyone left the church is Darwin offered a way to get rid of the haram. To get rid of laws and morals and values and religion by just giving something that could pretend to explain why it is that we're here. And we said it doesn't explain the real origins of the universe, but something that could try to explain. That's ultimately why it's there. People don't leave Islam because of Darwinism. People leave Islam because they want to do the haram without restriction. And they're emotional. And usually you get things like, I made dua and Allah didn't accept my dua. But when that atheist first comes to you, that's not what they say. When they first come to you, what do they say? They say, I've left Islam after detailed study. I have been through the books of biology. And I have decided that the theory of evolution disproves Islam. In reality, what they want to say is, I wanted to party all day and all night and do every kind of haram and not have anyone judge me for it. And I found this theory of evolution which gives me a justification for doing so. That's the reality of it. Atheism is an emotional argument, not a logical argument. And if you don't take anything away from today, and I know it wasn't maybe easy for everyone to follow what I was saying, but if you don't take anything away today, but that you'll benefit, inshallah. Atheism is not rational, it's not logical, it's not scientific. Atheism is emotional. I once watched a documentary on this, something called A Brief History of Atheism or something like that. It was presented by that atheist, I think Richard Dawkins presented it. And they went through all the reasons, they interviewed prominent atheists. Why are you an atheist? And these atheists were like, well, why is there evil in the world? Why did God not guide me? Why did God not do this? Why did God not answer my prayer? None of them said the theory of evolution. That came as a justification later on. Look, I'll prove to you why. But it's an emotional argument. It's if God wanted to guide, if God guides, why didn't He guide me? If God guides, why did bad things happen to me? It's an emotional argument, not a rational, logical argument that is like, oh wow, this person is really, really clever. And I'll leave you with a final benefit in this, inshaAllah ta'ala, which I also believe, to me, is a big benefit. I personally feel it's a big benefit on this topic. And it's similar to that issue regarding the atheists, regarding it being an emotional, not a rational thing, not something that people think about. And that is, look at the most intelligent people in the world. I'm talking about just from a pure scientific, how many of those people are atheists? Alhamdulillah, not all of them are atheists. Not all of them believe in Darwin's theory of evolution, but how many geniuses are there who don't even recognize that they have a creator? And that shows you that without Allah's guidance, doesn't matter how clever you are. You can't be clever, you can't win Jannah by being clever. Or you can't get Jannah by being clever. You can only get it by being guided from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why we see, subhanAllah, that what we see from these people is the geniuses of the world, the most intelligent people with the IQs that are crazy high IQs, and yet so many of them were atheists. So many of them didn't believe in God. The most basic, the most logical, the most sensible, the most easy to understand thing, and they didn't understand it. So it's not about intelligence. It's about guidance from Allah. And if Allah Azza wa Jal guides you, there is none that can misguide you. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala misguides you, there is none that can guide you. And even within Islam, we see the same thing, the same concept. We see Muslims who went astray, and towards the end of their life, they wished that they could have just had the simple beliefs of the ordinary Muslims. Like for example, Fakhruddin al-Razi and others, who when they died, they actually, they had all these complicated, logical, kind of scientific understandings of religion, and when they died, they just said, look, I just wish that I could have died with a simple belief in Allah. And al-Razi was famous for saying that I wish I could die upon the belief of the old women of Najran. In other words, I just want to die with the belief in Allah that the old ladies in the village have. Just a simple belief that Allah created us. And you hear the atheists turn around and say, you only have this belief because the reason you have this belief is just to give yourself comfort and make yourself feel happy. And that human beings develop this as an evolutionary response to kind of argue that, just to make them feel better about the fact that they exist and make them feel like there's something more to life. The reality is, the Quran is what is between us and them. The Quran, as we said, we can prove that it's a miracle, we can prove that it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Quran gives us everything we need. Don't need any complicated scientific answers. And that's why the Quran is not a book of science. The Quran is a book of Iman, and a book of Aqeedah, a book about Allah, and a book about how to live your life. So I hope that has at least helped a little bit. I'll give a disclaimer that I didn't bring all of the scientific proofs in here because I felt that it's not a science lesson. And there are better people than me to give it. If you want a science lesson, let's bring a PhD in biology from one of the Muslims and let them explain to you as a science lesson. It's not intended to be a science lesson. It's just intended to show how Islam sees this theory and how it's used by atheists to take people away from the path of Allah Azza wa Jal. هذا والله أعلم والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.
Hey guys, I really hope that you benefited from that video. Before you go, I want to ask you a really important question. Have you guys ever thought about studying Islam and seeking knowledge? If not, then I want you to reflect upon this hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet said that seeking knowledge is obligatory upon every single Muslim. Of course, that doesn't mean you have to be a scholar, but you have to know the basics in order for you to be the best possible slave and worshipper of Allah that you can possibly be. So we decided to provide a solution for this. You see, many people want to study, but they don't have the means or the resources to do so. So we set up an online institute called the Knowledge College, where you can study Islam from the comfort of your own home. So if you want more information on the Knowledge College and you'd like to sign up, go to the link below, check out the website, and hopefully we'll see you on the other side. Assalamu alaikum.